Hey everyone, coming at you with another AWS project. Today we're going to create a simple quiz game that uses Amazon Cognito, which will let you register for an account and sign in, just like that, all without very much effort. This is just a really simple quiz game. It's a React app. The questions and answers are hard-coded, so nothing too fancy, but the important parts are the Amplify and Cognito services and getting those to work together. Now, before we get too far along, the all-important question, what will this cost me? So there are basically two different services we're going to be using that might have costs associated with them. Going out to the pricing pages, starting with Cognito. Cognito has a free tier available that's beyond the regular 12-month free tier that you might be familiar with, and this is based on monthly active users, or MAUs. So the free tier is basically 50,000 MAUs. So I'm guessing that all of you are going to fall within that. Outside of that, though, you'll see the pricing here per monthly active user. So Cognito probably is going to be free for you. And then for Amplify, there's a couple different parts. We are going to be building out the back end for Amplify. There's no charge to use things like the CLI or the libraries. You really just pay for the back end services that you're actually using. For us, again, that's just going to be Cognito, and we saw that that's essentially going to be free for you. And then the hosting part, this means hosting the front end of your application. We're going to start building the application locally in Visual Studio Code, and you can run the application, run the front end locally, and still use Cognito on the back end. So if that's all you want to do, then the front end is basically free. You aren't hosting anything in Amplify. If you do want to host in Amplify, though, chances are you're inside of the free 12 months, if you're in the free tier still. And then outside of that, you'll be doing pay-as-you-go, and you'll see here it depends on your data storage, the data transfer out, request count, and so on. But I'm guessing for most of you, this whole project will be free or very, very inexpensive. But that said, stick around to the end of the video. I'll show you how to delete everything that we do, just so you don't get any surprise bills at some point in the future. Okay, so let's go see what we're doing here. I'm going to be using a tool called eraser.io. It's just really handy to do checklists here, and then we're also going to be doing some diagramming as well. Link in the description if you're interested in using it. But basically, these are the steps that we're going to go through here. Let's start with setting up the environment. So like I said, we're going to be using VS Code. You can use a different IDE if you want, but you do need Node installed. If you don't have that installed, you can get that at nodejs.org. And then we also need to set up the Amplify CLI. This is going to let us create the project, add different components, push things out to the cloud, and so on. And incidentally, if you do need the basics of Amplify, check out this other video that might help. But let me just start a simple diagram here so we can keep track of what we're doing. I'll do a cloud architecture diagram. And this lets you do diagramming as code, which is pretty cool. I'm actually going to get rid of everything, though, and we're just going to start with Amplify and the icon. We'll come back and add some connections as we build more things out. But basically, this is what we've got going on here. Okay, so over to Visual Studio Code. And here in the terminal, we're going to do an npm install for the Amplify CLI. Now, if you don't want to type all of this stuff from scratch, I did create a repo for this video. And here's all the different commands that I'm going to be running if you just want to copy paste those. And then I've also got the code files uploaded as well. When we get to those, you can just copy and paste that code. Okay, so let's grab this first one here and go back over to VS Code. I'll just paste that in and start the install. Okay, next we need to configure Amplify. This basically makes the CLI work with your AWS accounts. We'll have to set up a new user, configure access keys, and all of that. But the command is just amplify configure. And that will launch a page to the AWS console, asking you to sign in as an administrator account. I've done that here. I've signed into an account that has admin permissions, but not my root account. So after you're signed in, you just want to press enter here. And then just go through a few more questions. So your region, for me, I am in US West 2, Oregon. Just use your arrow keys up and down to select your region and then hit enter. And then this will launch the Amplify documentation with instructions on what you need to do next. This page right here So amplify configure, that's the command that we just ran. And then it's basically giving you a step-by-step of what's happening. We already selected the region. So next what we need to do is navigate to the IAM user creation page in the console. So let's go do that. I'll go to IAM, recently visited, or if it's not in recently visited for you, just navigate here. Come over to users and create a new user. I'm going to call the user Amplify Dev. You can choose another name if you want, but then I'll say next. I don't want to add it to any groups. Instead, what I want to do is attach policies directly. And then there's a policy here called Administrator Access-Amplify. If you don't see that, you can just type in Amplify here, and that will filter for you. So select that policy name, say next, and then create user. And again, this is all in the documentation that got launched for you. Okay, back to VS Code. So once we've created the user, we press enter. Let me just give us a little bit more space here. Next, you need to enter the access key ID and the secret access key for that user that you just created. So back to IAM, I'll click into the user. And then you want to come to the Security Credentials tab. And scrolling down, access keys. So there's no access keys here right now. You want to create them. And specifically, these will be for the CLI. So select that. Scroll down, understand and accept, and say next. And create access key. Okay, so you want to grab the access key here. I'll just copy that to my clipboard. Go back to Visual Studio. And for me, at least on Windows, I have to right-click my mouse to paste that in. There we go, and hit enter. And then let's go grab the secret access key. Show, copy. Don't worry, I'm going to delete this user when we're done. I'll paste that in. And then would you like to update or create an AWS profile on your local machine? Yes, we do. I'm going to call mine Amplify Dev Local. And this will save this information, like the region, the keys, and so on your local machine so that you don't have to do this every time. So we'll hit enter and success. Excellent. Okay, back to our checklist. We've set up the environment. So now we can interact with Amplify from our local IDE. Okay, next let's create our React app. Back to VS Code. Here I'm going to say npx create React app, and then whatever name you want to give it, I'm calling mine my quiz app. Okay, cool. So this is just a vanilla React app. You'll see all the different code and everything that we get up here. And then you want to change directories into whatever you named your app. So for me, it was my quiz app. And just go down that level. Next, we need to initialize the Amplify project within the React app. So here it's going to ask you a series of questions like, what do you want to name your Amplify app in the cloud? What language are you using? What's your local IDE? And that kind of thing. So to do this, we just say amplify init. It is recommended to run this from the root. We're already in there. Perfect. So the name for the project, this is the name that's going to show up in the AWS console when we go look at our Amplify projects. So different from what we just created locally on our file system. And I'll just go with the suggestion here, my quiz app. And then it'll start with a default configuration based on what it's detecting. So it sees that we're in VS Code. It sees that we're using JavaScript and specifically React. Our source directory path, so where the code is here in the src file, and so on. So if you're good with all of that, then we'll say yes, let's proceed with this configuration. If you said no, then you can go customize those things. The authentication method, so we did save the AWS profile that we set up earlier. You could enter keys again, but let's go with the profile, and I called mine Amplify Dev Local. So I'll select that. Do we want to help Amplify improve by sharing non-sensitive project configurations? I'm going to say no. and we'll continue. All right, cool. Now it gives you some possible next steps here. You could try adding an API. You could do Amplify push to deploy everything. For now, we're just going to go check this off our checklist and then move on. So we created the React app, check. And if we go out to the AWS console now, I'll navigate to Amplify. We've got my quiz app, so this is the one that I just created from the command line. It created an environment for us called dev, but this is basically empty. We don't have any authentication or databases or APIs or anything like that. It's just kind of an empty container right now for the application, but everything worked as far as that goes, so that's great. Okay, so let's actually add something to this app now, and that's going to be authentication using Cognito. So in our diagram, we'll add a new node for Cognito, and then we need to connect these two. So we'll do a connector in eraser.io. We can do a bidirectional one with the less than, greater than, and Cognito. So that's what we're going for. Back to VS Code. You can add Cognito, add these connections and everything really simply. Just here on the command line, we're going to say amplify add auth. And then this will ask you some questions about what exactly you want to do. We're going to go with a default configuration that will give us Cognito. You can do federation with a social provider like Facebook or Google or something like that. You can do manual configuration, but we're just going to go with the default and hit enter. We want users to sign in using an email, so I'll select that. Nope, we don't want to do any advanced settings. No, I'm done. And now let's push everything out to AWS. We'll say Amplify push. Yes, we want to continue. Nice. So it looks like everything deployed okay. Cognito is built around this concept of a user pool, which is basically a pool of users that are going to register and log into your application. So if we go out to Cognito, here in the console, we should see a new user pool created for us. Here we go, 2 minutes ago, that's us. So if we click into here, it looks like everything got set up correctly. We don't have any users yet though. So let's get the UI set up enough that we can actually create an account and log in as a new user. So back to VS Code, I'm going to open up the app.js file. So this is our main file for the React application. I'm actually going to replace this with my code that I put out in GitHub. You can grab this as well if you want. Again, this is linked in the description for the video, but we want app.js. And I'm just going to grab all this code right here, copy it, and replace everything here in VS Code. Now I do have the quiz functionality in here, which we haven't implemented yet, so let me just comment this out. It's line 19, and then down here, I'll do these comments, line 32. Save. But before we run it, there's one other thing we need to do. We need to install the Amplify libraries that give us the login user interface. That's going to be this line right here, npm install AWS Amplify, AWS Amplify /UI-React. Okay, good. And now we can actually run the application, go create an account, and log in. I'll just do an npm start. And that launches on localhost port 3000 for me with this fabulous UI that we can use to create an account or sign in. So let's create an account. You do need to use a valid email for this. It's going to send you a code that you have to use to activate the email. So I'll enter my email, password, and create the account. So it has emailed me a code. I'll go grab that confirmation code, enter that here, and confirm. So this is a legit user account, and that logged us in. At the moment, all of our quiz functionality is commented out, so all we have is a sign out button, but we could sign out and then sign back in using the email and password we just used to create the account. Excellent. Now if we go back and look at our user pool and refresh the users, you'll see that we have one user. Cool. So let's go check this off the list. We have added authentication with Cognito. We got both of those working, even though we're just running the UI locally on localhost. Now we kind of skipped over the code that's making all of that happen. So let me quickly walk you through that. I've also added lots of comments that will hopefully help, but we're starting with importing the Amplify library from the AWS Amplify package. This is how we're going to interact with different AWS services. And then really the line that makes the authentication magic work is this one here, importing authenticator. And with authenticator, this is coming from the UI React library that we installed down on the terminal a little bit ago. So this is how you get that nice sign-in screen and the sign-up screen and that functionality. So this line is key. We also want to make sure that things look good, so we're importing the styles.css. And then I've got two lines for AWS exports. This holds configuration for various things. You can see that file right here. So things like my Cognito region, my user pool ID, and so on. So really, without very much code, you're able to get a smooth authentication experience using Cognito. Okay, back to our checklist. So let's go add some functionality and styling for the quiz. Now this part is not so important. I just put a quiz in so there was something fun to do in the application. Really the Amplify and Cognito part is the main takeaway from the video. But I do have some code out here in our repo that you can grab for quiz. I'll just copy all that. And then back in VS Code, you want to add a new file under the src folder. So new file, call it quiz.js. And then just paste all of that code in. Save. And then you want a second file in the same location, src. This one is called quizdata.js. And let me grab that code out of GitHub. And these are the questions and answers. So like I said in the beginning, they're just hard-coded, nothing fancy. In the real world, you'd probably want a database, and you'd want to get these from an API or something like that. But we're just keeping things simple. And then back in app.js, we had commented out these two lines. So line 19, put that back in. We're importing the quiz component. And then down here, actually placing it on our page. Save that file. And when you save it, your page should refresh. And now we have questions. So the first video game ever made, Space War. You can see the answers in the JS file if you want to know which ones are correct. Okay, back to our checklist then. We have added that functionality and styling for the quiz. Now, if this is all you want to do is just run your front end locally on localhost and use Cognito on the back end, then you're good to go. In the real world, though, it's more likely that you're going to have your code in GitHub or another source control repository. You're going to hook that up to Amplify and host the front end there. So I'm going to walk you through that. Over here in our diagram, let me add nodes for GitHub and VS Code. And then we need some connectors as well. So let me rearrange things here though, resize a little bit. So we have our code in VS Code currently. What we want to do is push that out to a new GitHub repo. And then we want to set up Amplify to pull from that repo, and Amplify will host the front end. Also, whenever we make a change to the code in GitHub, we want to trigger a new build and deploy in Amplify. So basically a continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD pipeline that you're setting up here. All right, let's work on this bit right here, getting the code out to a GitHub repository. So this step over here, push local code to GitHub. Let me go back to GitHub here. So this is the repo that I created just for you to grab code, but I'm going to create another repository to hook up to Amplify. So let me open up a new tab. Looks like I'm not signed in, so let me sign in. And then I'll create a new repository. You can name your repo whatever you want. I'm going to go with Amplify Cognito Quiz 2. I had one without a 2 on it, so I'm just going to add that. I'll make this private. Again, this is just for me to push my code out and then hook up to Amplify. You can add a README if you want. I'm going to skip it and then create the repository. So we've got the remote repository created out in GitHub. Now we need to hook things up with what we've got going on in Visual Studio Code. Now, for the most part, you can actually use this code right here, except instead of just adding a README, you're going to do add period to add all of the files that you've been working on. But you will need this URL right here. So I'm going to grab that and then switch over to Visual Studio Code and then do a git init. So initializing the repo for the project, git add period. So adding everything that we have changed or added to this folder. Git commit -m, and then whatever comment you want, I'll just say initial commit. Git branch -m main, we're going to call that our branch name. And then git remote add origin. And here's where you want to put in your repository URL that you just created. So I'll paste mine in. And then finally, you want to push everything out. So git push -u, origin, and main. Okay. Let's go make sure everything made it out there. So back in the repo here, there's all of the code that I just checked in. Perfect. So we've checked in our code from VS Code out to GitHub, so we can check that part off. Now we need to hook up Amplify to basically go grab that code out of GitHub and set up some CI/CD. So to do that, let's come back to the AWS console, come into Amplify. So here's my application. We've got the backend environment. We've seen that's working. We've got Cognito. We can log in, register for a new account, and so on. The front end is under hosting environments. And here it's basically going to say, where are all of your files? So let's walk through this. They're in GitHub, because we just put them there. Let's say connect branch. And then select the repository. Now mine is not showing up here. Mine should be called Amplify Cognito Quiz 2. You can refresh, but I think the problem is probably permissions. And there's actually a handy little way to get there from here. So if you don't see your repo, ensure the Amplify GitHub app has permissions to the repository. And I think it doesn't, so let me say, view those permissions. This will take me out to GitHub, to my settings, and then down here, you want to select the repository. If you've said all repositories, this gives Amplify permissions on all of your repositories. I've said only select repositories, and I need to add that new one, which was this one right here, Amplify Cognito Quiz 2, save, and then I should be able to back up to Amplify. I'll have to start that over by going to GitHub, and this time it should find my repository. Here we go. So this is the new one. My branch is called main. Perfect. I'll say next. For app name, I'll leave this as it is. And then the back end should be called something else. Let me just double check that. Let me open up a new tab. I've done a few of these as I've been prepping, so I want to make sure I've got the right back end. So my quiz app is where the back end was. So my quiz app, you probably just have one, so you don't need to worry about this. But my quiz app, and then there should be an environment called dev. Perfect. We want to enable full stack CI/CD. So anytime we make a change in the GitHub repo, that will trigger a new build and deployment here in Amplify. And then we'll need a service role that gives Amplify Hosting access to our resources. Now, I've already got several created here, but you probably don't. So let me just walk you through how to create a new role. Click on this right here. And then you just basically walk through and take all the defaults. So for an AWS service, it's filled in Amplify for you as the service. For backend deployment, say next. Very importantly, it's added this policy, Administrator Access Amplify. If you're creating a new role from scratch for some reason, you want to make sure this policy is added, otherwise nothing is going to work. It will fail at the build stage. But if you're walking through this wizard, everything should be good for you. We'll say next. I already have a role called this, so I'll just add a 2 to the end of that. You probably don't, so you can just accept the defaults and create role. Okay, excellent. So this is the role that we want to select back here in Amplify. You'll probably have to do a refresh. And here we go. There's the new role. Scrolling down, next. And save and deploy. Okay, so you can watch the progress here as it's going along. It's provisioned. Now it's building things. So it's gone out, grabbed our code out of GitHub, doing the build, and then it's going to deploy it. And very shortly, we should be able to launch this URL right here and see our quiz running in the cloud. And success. So the build worked, the deploy worked, and now if we click on this link, that should take us to our Amplify app. We've got a real URL out here. We're no longer on localhost, obviously. We should be able to sign in using that email address that we created earlier. So this is still using the same user pool and has that account that I created. So I'll log in. And we've got our questions. Nice. Now to show you that CI/CD is working, if you were to come back to the code that's in GitHub now, so let me come into our SRC folder here, and let's say I want to update the quiz data file. So maybe remove one of our questions, let's say. So I'll just edit this in place, and we'll get rid of this first question, and commit that change. Commit to the main branch. And as soon as that happens, Amplify should, here we go, detect that we made a change. It's doing the provision, doing the build, and it'll do a deployment. All right, so we'll let that run. I do want to show you how to delete everything before we're done, but let's just make sure that we've hit everything on our list here. So we've got this hosted, we've got CI/CD, and like magic, everything is working. Very nice. So back to Amplify. I'll let this finish. It's usually not a good idea to try deleting your app while it's in the middle of doing something like this. So give me a minute and I'll be right back. All right, everything built and deployed. Excellent. So you can leave this running. We covered the costs in the beginning, but assuming that you want to delete, just come up here to Actions and Delete App. You'll confirm and delete. And when you delete the back-end stuff, it should delete Cognito for you as well, or anything else you had. If you're building another type of application, say that you had a database or APIs or something that were part of that, all of that should be blown away when you delete the AWS Amplify app. And then if we look at the Cognito user pools, here's the one that we were working with before. If we refresh this list, this one should be gone. There we go. So we got rid of that as part of deleting the Amplify app. We did create an IAM user Amplify dev. There's no charge associated with IAM users. I'm going to keep mine, but if you don't plan to use yours in the future, you can go ahead and delete it. All right, and with that, we've made it through our list. I hope you were able to get yours working as well. If you found it helpful, give me a big thumbs up, and also think about subscribing for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching.